questions, because I think one of the questions might concern Joy and Jimson and a lot of other people. It was asked by Alan Risberg out in Scotland. His question was, he actually has a master's athlete or an athlete that, actually you fill it in, Alan.
I was approached by a guy who wants to come back and race as a master. He did race back in the day. He won the New Year sprint, which is a professional handicap sprint. I don't know if Jimson's ever heard of the guy. He's called Willie Fraser. He's about 54, and he wants to start training to compete again. He has a history of Achilles tendons problems. So I was asking Nico, is there any micro stretching we can do, one, to prevent any Achilles tendon problems, and two, any micro stretching to be done once an Achilles injury has happened?
And that's a good question. First and foremost, the way I would approach it is, has he had other injuries? So obviously you haven't asked those questions, but if he's had hamstring injuries or if he's had knee problems, sometimes they sort of metamorphose into an Achilles tendon issue because of the compensation shifts that he's having, unless he's actually had direct tear in the Achilles tendons themselves. So the thing is, Alan and the whole panel, and please unmute yourselves. I just want to have, just like the whole idea is basically for us just to have a great discussion and fill it in. So the way I approach it is, I'm not totally focused on the Achilles itself. I would actually, you know what would be really good, if you can actually, if he allows you, do a video of this gentleman, and then bring it next week and put it on this panel here, because what we could also see is how is he moving, or his movement patterns been affected by the Achilles tendon. Now, having said that, my concern would not be the Achilles tendon itself, but how the Achilles tendon has affected the rest of the body. So I would not just prescribe an Achilles tendon stretch for this gentleman here. I would actually also look at prescribing a glute stretch, which I'm going to get into, an IT band stretch, which I'm going to show you guys, as well as a hip flexor stretch. Now, there's a guy named Hunter Chernesky. He's an athlete who's based out of Arizona, and myself and Derek Hansen and several other people have been working on him. And he has an Achilles tendon issue as well. His left Achilles is smaller than his right Achilles, and the left Achilles is the one that's got the issues. And if you look at his movement patterns, in fact, when he jumps, he's in the air, he's got more plantar flexion with the Achilles tendon that's injured as opposed to the other one, which is a quick indication as to how tight or scarred up the Achilles tendon is on the left side. So the way we approached him, and the way I approached him with the stretches I gave him a Soleus stretch, followed by an Achilles, followed by a hip flexor stretch. And I could send you the actual, I'll send the whole panel, the actual sequence that I put together. But the focus was on opening up all those muscles that were affected by the Achilles itself. So let's get into the actual stretches now. Let's see if we can do this properly. Okay. So I'm going to put it down here. Has changed. What? Who cares? Anyways, am I there or not? Have I lost you?
No, your video got stopped.
Oh, Jesus. Now it's my green screen. Wait a second.
He's not on the call.
All right.
There you go. He'll hockey.
It's back to that stupid computer thing. Okay.
I thought you had your little camera.
I did, but that's the thing that died on me just now.
Yeah.
Okay. So You guys see my foot?
Yep.
Yep.
This is a soleus stretch. So the idea is to place something underneath the balls of your foot. And so if I use a book like this, now the key is if there's something underneath the balls of your foot, you got to make sure that the heel is touching the ground. If I'm in a position like this where my heel is off the ground, it's telling me that the Achilles is too tight, or this is a little too high, so I would have to go lower. But for argument's sake, right now I'm going to use this thing. So you have the Achilles touching the ground, you have the balls of your foot, this underneath the ball of your foot, and all you're going to do is you're just going to sit there for about a minute, picking up a gentle stretch in the soleus area. Okay? And then you go to the other side, and you repeat the same stretch. And after you do these stretches, you do them, you hold each stretch for a minute, you repeat it 2 more times. So there's 6 minutes of actual soleus stretch. Followed then by this is for the glutes. See, I changed my room around. So this here, the banister is a wall. You got to make sure you have pillows underneath your head, like that. And all you're going to do is you put your feet square up against the wall like this. You guys can see me, yes or no?
Yep, see you.
Yep.
Perfect.
But you know what?
What?
The wall to your right, or the cabinet or everything to the right there, if you turn that direction, put your feet up there and do it, we can see everything a little better probably. Yep, do that right there.
Is that I'm going to be scrunched up.
Hey, that's not my issue.
Uh,
You're too tall.
Okay.
Okay.
More stretching for you.
Yeah, now you're too close to the camera though. You're better when you're the other. There you go. Try that. And if it doesn't work, we go back.
How's this? You know, my webcam, my good webcam's coming tomorrow. Can you guys see this?
Yeah, but you're going to be too close, I think, now.
Yeah. But it's just right up there at that angle.
Okay.
Okay.
You see this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. So, same idea. See my feet?
Yep.
Okay. Knees, shoulder length apart. With the foot
Yep.
still underneath your head. Very important to flatten out the lumbar area. And then from here, all it is you're just going to cross over.
Oh yeah, the 4.
The ankle is past the knee joint. Got that?
You got to talk louder because you're really far away from the mic. Just speak louder. There you go. That's a better one. Right there is perfect. Ankle.
Okay. So you make sure that the ankle is past the knee joint, and you make sure that your hips are.
Yeah, we can't really hear you now. You're kind of muffled.
Let me see.
Nikos, but that you showed us, I remember that that stretch before. And are you confirming that we should do those type of micro stretching, not bouncing the holding just like that? And the evening, I just wanted to make sure we're on the same page with
Definitely.
that. Yeah.
Definitely in the evening.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay.
You need to do this before you go to bed because the key is the key is to be able to get that good solid sleep. Every time I micro stretch without failure, Jimson's mentioned this as well,
Yes.
is your sleep is through the roof. It's so deep,
So great.
you know. It's very, very important. So continuing on. So can you guys hear me and see me?
Yeah,
Not
you got to
that
kind of
much.
turn your head to the right and really speak loudly.
Okay.
We can't hear you at all now.
Okay, I know what I'm gonna do.
Okay.
If you can't hear me after this, I quit.
Yeah, that'll help.
Don't do that.
Okay. And also, Nikos, because we can't see your head in that, you do have a pillow under your neck to keep your lumbar flat, correct?
That's correct. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
You can hear.
Are you AT&T or Sprint?
I feel like I'm I feel like I'm a Elvis Presley.
Yeah.
And we still can't hear you for some reason.
Okay. Well, we get the gist of it.
The microphone? It must not be set on your mic it's probably doing your internal microphone instead of the plugged in one.
So, guys, I apologize.
It's okay.
No, this is ridiculous. You guys are basically coming here, listening to me, and then all of a sudden, I'm screwing up. Let me just see.
Yeah.
Femi, apologies.
It's okay.
Well, yeah, it's okay. And I know we did have some specific questions.
Yeah.
Especially.
Well, anyways, so are you guys, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so Bad Tom or Alan would be the second stretch. And we're gonna, trust me, next time we're actually gonna have everything in the way where I'm trying to actually see if I can get into the how do you say, trying to get into the mic. Okay, wait a sec. Is this it? Change mic. Oh, I hate this. It's embarrassing, guys. It's embarrassing.
Okay.
Anyways, how is this better?
Yeah, we could totally hear you fine. I think it's just when you laid down, it just cut off. So.
Okay.
So.
All right.
Yeah.
So so the second stretch would be for the glutes. So the idea is that when you're lying on the ground and you've got your head underneath on top of a pillow, your lumbar area is flat across. You cross your legs over. So you got to make sure. I'm going to attempt this again. You got to make sure that the key is that the ankle is past the knee joint. You guys hear
Okay.
that?
Yeah, that's good. And we can hear you now.
Perfect. So you would hold that for a minute, and then you would actually cross over. Things that you have to keep in mind is when you're crossing over and all of a sudden your hip is off the ground, it's an indication that it's very, very tight. So you have to push back. So you move away from the wall, make sure that this is lowered to the ground. So that's the second stretch. The third stretch is for the IT band. Now the IT band stretch is very, very simple. So I've moved my angle this way. So let me know if you guys can see the fact that I have this peanut here. Can you see this implement?
Yes.
Now, what you can use at home would be a pillow. So you make sure you put the pillow underneath both knees. Head again is on a pillow, making sure the lumbar is flat. And all you're doing now is bringing your leg over and just putting a little pressure on the right or the left knee with the right hand. And I'm going to reverse. And what you're doing now is you're getting an IT band stretch. Okay? So we've gone soleus, we've done the glute piriformis, we've done the IT band stretch. Now the next stretch in the session, in the sequence, would be for the hip flexor. Now, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Oh, perfect. So for the hip flexor stretch, all it is, in a nutshell, is that the side that's getting stretched, so in this case, in my, so in my case right here, the side that's being stretched is the side that's being supported. So you need to stretch your hip flexor this way. Don't do it this way, because what's happening right now is your body's contracting to keep you in this position. and the muscles are contracting to keep you in that position. And that's a definitely, it's not a good way to actually get a nice micro stretch, but at the same time, if your muscle is contracting to support you, then that's not a stretch. So you support, the side that's getting stretched is the side that's being supported. So ideally have a chair on either side, which is perfect. So if I had a chair on either side, I would hold this for a minute, and then I would switch, make sure that your hips are always shoulder length apart. The knees are shoulder length apart. The hips are square. They have to be square, and your shoulders have to be square. It makes no sense for you to do a hip flexor stretch where your, in this case, my right knee is closer to my left knee. It's not going to target the hip flexor properly. And then the last stretch, Alan, would be, again, the one sitting down, focusing on the soleus. That's the sequence.
Yep, thank you. It's great.
Now, the other question that Alan had was a thoracolumbar stretch. And in a nutshell, this is one of my favorite stretches. I would use a chair. So I would use a chair. Let's get this happening again. So as you can see, I'm on a chair, but the first stretch that needs to be done is you want to make sure that you're stretching the hip flexor. So this is a really good stretch for people that suffer from knee issues, and Fem, this is the stretch that I would actually use if I've got a patellar femoral issue, which is what you're talking about. Okay, so you start the stretch. So I do a hip flexor stretch. All it is, guys, is I'm holding onto the back of the chair and I'm leaning back. And now I'm getting a quad, and I'm also getting a hip flexor stretch. Now, for the thoracolumbar, all it is this. So I'm going to put the mic down. Is I rotate this way and then slightly come forward. As soon as I rotate and slightly come forward like this, I'm going to pick up a stretch right through my thoracolumbar fascia. So I would hold the stretch for the hip flex for a minute.
Nice.
And then I would release the stretch slightly, because you don't want to hold the stretch for longer than a minute. Release the stretch slightly, rotate towards the back of the chair and come forward. And move your hip away from the chair, which then focuses on the thoracolumbar fascia. And that's a stretch that I would use to stretch the thoracolumbar fascia. Okay?
That's great. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Nikos, obviously I was,
Femi's got the question.
yeah, so my question was, we're still in a day of age where patellar tendonitis or tendinopathy is still a massive issue. And you've got like the older athletes just from years of pounding, and then you got the younger athletes through development. What would your suggestion be for working with anyone with tendinopathy on the patellar tendon?
Well, again, the patellar tendon itself, almost, it doesn't share, but it sort of shares the same area as where the, so the patellar tendon here, okay? What it does is it also shares the same area as the IT band, because the IT band comes in through here and its fibers connect like this. So in order to focus on what's happening here, you would need to focus on 3 muscle groups that are very, very important. And the last stretch would be for the patellar tendon. I mean, I have also worked with kids who have Osgood slatters, which basically is a condition where the patellar tendon, as they're growing, the patellar tendon is so strong that it actually pulls the tibial tuberosity, this part of the tibia, forward, and they get that bump. The issue that a lot of people do is they tend to focus on strengthening but that's to the detriment of the range of motion of the whole system. So what you need to do to help with patellar tendinopathy is, first and foremost, you've got to alleviate the IT band. Remember that stretch that I showed you guys with the pillow where I crossed my leg over about 5-10 minutes ago? That's specifically IT band. In fact, that also works with the piriformis muscle. So those who suffer from sciatica, that is one of the best stretches. So I would do, first and foremost, Femi, I would focus on releasing the IT band. Now, then the focus becomes the quadricep hip flexor. If the person has a lot of issues with regards to pain, don't show them a hip flexor stretch where they've got the knee on the ground, as you know I was demonstrating before, but the one using the chair, because this is a hip flexor stretch. You're getting a nice stretch through the quad. And sometimes the issue with patellar tendinopathy is a lot of people say, I'm not feeling it in my hip flexor, but I'm actually feeling it in my quad. And that's always an indication as to how tight the quad is. So you would say to them, hey, don't worry about the hip flex. Don't worry about feeling the stretch up here. Work here, because that's the issue at hand right now. So then I would go IT band, then I would do the followed then by doing the glute piriformis stretch, you know, the one where you're up against the wall, okay? And then the hamstring. Those are the 4 stretches that I would focus on prior to them going to sleep to deal with any patellar tendinopathy. Whether they're a young athlete, and if an athlete presents himself with patellar tendinopathy, chances are that it's more like Osgood Slatters. So, and here's the key. When a person presents with Osgood Slatters, you also got to see, sometimes it's not bilateral. So if they're actually having more issue on their right side, then you've got to, as a coach, look at the movement patterns and see how they're compensating to the left side. And now you've got to look at working the body bilaterally. Don't just focus on the right side, guys. The key is you have to look at the body bilaterally. So what's happening on one side of the body is going to affect the other side of the body. And the other key, which is very important, which is why I'm glad we're having these discussions, is don't just focus on the issue at hand. So don't just focus on the right patellar tendon. Focus on how everything else is affected by that patellar tendon. Does that answer your question, Sam?
Yeah, thanks for that.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Debbie. I have a question. It's actually more of a personal question. I've been battling a hamstring insertion issue, and I've had PRP
Okay, high up in the glute.
and LED. And so, what stretches do you recommend for that kind of tendonitis?
So are you saying, so you're origin or insertion? Are you talking about insertion down by the gastroc area or origin up by the glute area?
By the glute area.
Okay, so that's the origin. The key then is you have to, don't focus on the hamstring as yet. The hamstring muscle group, or that whole area there, is the last muscle that needs to get stretched. The key then is threefold. You got to start stretching the hip flexor, because chances are sometimes what's happening with people that develop a lot of hamstring issues, Deb, is they tend to develop almost like a slight hyperlordotic curve. So they have sway back, as we call it.
Mm-hmm.
What it is happens then is when you have a slight sway back, the hamstring muscles are put on a lengthened, weakened position because the pelvis is anteriorly rotated this way, forward, which puts a lot of stress through the glute area. So the issue at hand then is that the hip flexor is very, very tight. And that's what's causing the anterior tilt of the pelvis. and then it weakens the hamstring. So I personally would focus on stretching the hip flexor first. It's very important. So I'm going to release this area here. Okay. Then I would actually then go and stretch my glute. So here's the sequence. The glute was that stretch in my chest of drawers.
Mhm.
Then I would follow it with the soleus stretch. Now, you're saying, Nick, why would I want to stretch the soleus? Mainly because that's where your hamstrings insert. They may in that same area. So they may originate here in the glute, but they insert by the just below the knee where the soleus and the gastroc are. So you need to stretch that area as well. And then I would end off with stretching my hamstring.
Okay.
The key is, and I don't know if you were with us from the beginning, but the key is the intensity of the stretch. It has to be very, very gentle. So out of a scale of 0 to 10, a numerical rating scale of pain, if the stretch is 7 or 8 or 9, where you're really, 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 really feeling that muscle being pulled, that's too much. That causes inflammation. And that's what you're trying to prevent because your area is already inflamed. So it makes no sense for you to do a stretch that's going to take you to the point of pain and discomfort. 1, 2, you have to place your body in the position where you're not going to use your hamstring as a support muscle. So what do I mean by that? Here we go. I'm just going to show it.
Okay.
No. This stretch is a no because this whole leg here, my whole right leg is actually contracting to keep me in that position. That's not a stretch. Plus, I'm also balancing on my left leg. So if you want to do a proper hamstring stretch, Richie, I know you're on the phone. Mr. Mercado, Richie Mercado. Richie. Hey, Lauren, how are you?
I was on a phone call with
there's
you,
Lauren.
SATF on something.
Can you please send Deborah the PDF of the stretches that we have on the IAAF?
I can send her a link. Let me go right here. My
Because
picture
Deb-
problem.
I sent her the PowerPoint. I sent her the
Okay,
No, that's not
PowerPoint.
it.
Okay.
But I think what it is that when you look at that PDF file that me and iPhone are going to translate into Spanish, basically it actually has a nice hamstring stretch in the back where you're lying down and you're putting your leg up against a door jamb. The key is if you have an issue in your muscle and there's an inflammation in it, you have to place the muscle in a manner where you're not going to stimulate it while you're trying to stretch it.
Yep.
Okay, here it is. Let me put to everybody. Oh gosh, sorry. Let me go
Are you
back.
going to send it to us, Richie, or did you send it to me?
No, I'm about to post it, but hold on a second. Let me get it here.
And I thought I was bad. So that's a good question. And it does affect your push off as well. Are you finding that when you're pushing off
That's it right there.
Are you feeling it, Deb, on your push off?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of when it all started, right? You know, starting out of the blocks, right? And so, yeah, it is on the push off.
One thing that I will bring into play, which Tom touched upon last week is in his presentation, is when you're doing all these stretches, focus on your breathing as well.
Mhm.
Because the key is what you're trying to do is you're trying to deactivate the sympathetic nervous system. So you got to realize that your neural system contains 2 subcategories. One is the sympathetic, which is the fight, flight, or fright, which is getting you ready for activity. And it's also the one that gets stimulated for pain, mainly because once it's stimulated, it's basically saying, hey, I've got to remove myself from this thing. And what it does is it adds tension into the system. By deep breathing, you're going to go to a default of helping you activate your parasympathetic. So breathing is key for a lot of these stretches as well. Any other questions? Richie?
No, did that link work?
I see a lot of files on there. Is there a specific one?
Jensen's got a question.
Yeah, I'll get it. No, I'll send you the file. I know exactly where I'm on it right now, actually.
Thanks,
Okay.
Jimson. I didn't know.
Thank you.
Yeah, I do that stretch a lot, so it's.
I wanted to give you the whole folder.
And,
'cause it's got
and
all that
Debbie,
information.
Jimson had the same injury for some time too.
Well, thanks.
Actually,
yeah, thanks,
he
guys.
had a grade 2, wasn't it? A grade 2
Grade-
tear in the hamstring,
There.
actually.
Yeah, but that was a different one. That was in the belly. That wasn't in the.
Oh,
That wasn't the high one.
Okay, yeah, that one too. Okay.
huh.
It's-
So this is what I like to do with these chats is basically sort of sit down, ask questions, you know, try to pick my brains, the philosophy behind gentle stretching, which is very, very important. I mean, now this is going to be a promotional thing, but I'm actually offering an online course as well. So we just got CEU approved by the National Strength and Conditioning Association. So Tom, I expect to see you there July 11th.
I had a question.
Sure.
I wrote on the chat asking in relation to the Soleus stretch if the
I didn't see
tibialis
that.
anterior, if the tibialis anterior has a hard time relaxing, what conclusions can you come to?
Well, if the tibialis anterior has a hard time relaxing, it's because it's being put forward in a position like this. The Achilles tendon and the gastroc and the soleus are very, very tight. And it's almost always in plantar flexion. So the issue then becomes is you've got to basically stretch not only the soleus, but you also have to stretch the gastroc and the IT band to release what's happening on the tibialis anterior. Answer your question?
Yes.
Please leave yourself unmuted unless we get dive bombed or whatever that is, Skype bombed or Zoom bombed. Just leave it unmuted. It's very important. Oh. So any other questions? Any other running questions? Because there's a lot of coaches and athletes on this this Zoomcast right now. Femi's actually the head of athletics for Loughborough University, and Femi and I go back to UK athletics, and so every person could bring a different perspective to these conversations, which is what I'm trying to do, and this is why Richie and myself, and you know, if you guys have athletes that want to come on, this sort of builds a rapport amongst all of us to deal with issues at hand. Now, one thing that I'd love to leave you guys with is try some of these stretches. Like, for instance, try the Jimson's shared the and Richie sharing the PDF. There's the glute piriformis stretch, which is I think the third stretch in the sequence. Try that one at home. I mean, if you haven't done any of these stretches, and try it every night before you go to bed. So 6 minutes of the glute piriformis stretch. Tom actually talked about it last week in his presentation, where he actually has people do that stretch while they're breathing, and report to us. See how you feel next week, because it's very, very important.
Hey, I made a
Okay.
I made a thing that I posted for my kids years ago. I don't know why I'm echoing.
Okay, Richie, go ahead. So there's the Soleus stretch. And the key again is you got to make sure that the heel is down on the ground and that there's something at the ball of your foot, which is very, very important. Okay. Now, this is the Gastroc Stretch. So what it is basically is that in this case, the right knee is locked and you lean forward. Now, I don't like having the shoulders high up in a position like this, your arms high above your head or high above your shoulders, because it puts a lot of stress on the shoulders. So what you want to do is you want to have it low, the way it is right now. So use the back of a chair. And this is the only time where I will lock the knee. So you lock the right knee and you will move slightly forward, and that does the Gastroc Stretch. But the stretch I want you guys to do is the next one. Yeah, this one, the Glute Piriformis Stretch. Try it for a week. Things that you have to keep in mind is I want you guys to make sure that you've got a pillow underneath your head. I know Jimson does this every night. And you got to make sure that you're, like I was demonstrating before I was destroyed by this computer, that you make sure that your ankle is past the knee joint. So in this case, the left ankle is past the right knee. It doesn't matter. Do not think that you have to have your right foot or right leg, lower leg at 90 degrees. That doesn't matter. What matters is how gentle the stretch is on the left glute area. That's what matters. So if you're actually moving too close to the wall and your hip is off the ground, raised off the ground, then that's too much. And what then happens is it becomes a lot of tension is being put in that. Okay. So try the stretch for a week and report to us and do it before you go to bed. So it's only 6 minutes of stretching. Stretch your right side, your left side, right side for a minute, left side for a minute, and repeat it 2 more times. Focus on your breathing, deep breath, you know, where you're actually seeing your belly rise. Make sure you have a pillow underneath your head, you know. Any other questions?
Yeah, Nico, Femi again. Just clarify with your micro stretching. Are you saying it should only be done before you go to bed, or is there a different set that you would do sort of like pre-warm up for a competition or for training?
Good question. Thank you, Femi.
Or,
Yes,
or even,
micro-stretch.
or can I just also ask, even post-training, you've just done a training session and you're going to do your cool down. Do it then?
No.
Right.
And I'll answer both questions. I'll tell you why. First and foremost, what this stretching is about recovery regeneration. And it's not for a cool down effect. I know Tom has used it for a cool down effect, and that's a really good way of, yeah, I like it. Thanks, Jay. Micro stretching team, let's go for it. Anyways, no, the key prior to any activity, guys, like for instance, if I were to have worked on Usain Bolt before he got into the blocks in Beijing and did, or 1987, and did his 9.58, he would have been the most relaxed athlete out there, but he would not have run 9.58. I'll guarantee you that right now, because one thing that's very, very important in muscle and in movement is you have to have some form of stiffness in them. There has to be some stiffness in the myotendon junction in order for you to transfer the force that's generated through the muscle groups, through the tendon, to the joint. If you do micro stretching, or even if you do static stretching that has been used for eons as the to think before and after stretching. Before stretching, it actually sort of
For competition.
before competition. Thank you. Before competition, what it basically does is it destimulates your proprioceptive tissues. So now you're relaxed. This is why you see a sprinter when they get in their blocks, they're jumping, they are doing dynamic ballistic movement because they're trying to excite their nervous system. I mean, you see some of them slap their legs, for crying out loud. So prior to competition, dynamic flexibility. And make it dynamic flexibility, which is simple movements. I have seen people do complex dynamic flexibilities where they're basically jumping on one leg and then sprinting forward, or hopping back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and sprinting forward. No, 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 no. Dynamic flexibility done in a manner where you're going to excite the muscles, like leg swings backwards, forwards, front, back, trunk rotations, movement, and then slowly start building up to ballistic movements and sprint-like movements to get into the blocks. Now, why don't you want to do micro stretching immediately after? Is very simple. You've competed or you've just finished your training. You have a form of fatigue in your body, and that form of fatigue is not only neurally, but it's also in the muscle biochemically. So you don't have a command of how far you can really stretch. So you're warmed up a lot, your body or your muscle temperature is increased a lot. So then the tendency becomes for you to overstretch. And when you overstretch, that's when you can cause some damage. Okay, so after activity, Peter and the microstretching team, what you want to do is you want to, as Tom touched upon last week, you want to do this concept of aerobic flush. Now, this whole concept of aerobic flush started with me and a gentleman named Peter Twist back in 1994. We were working in the NHL, and then we saw athletes were coming off the ice, and what we thought is, you know, they still have some lactic acid in their body, so why don't we work on presenting a mechanism so they can remove as much lactic acid as possible through the cardiovascular system, because it's going to go into the limbs. And so we came up with the idea of having these athletes on bicycles. This is why you see, and it's caught on, where you see in a lot of premier games or in NFL, you see a lot of these athletes on their bikes just cycling away. And that's because what we're trying to do is we're trying to remove lactic acid from the system. Now, so after activity, light aerobic flush, you know, like jog, like light run, if you have a bike, preferably a bike. And then you want to replenish the glucose and glycogen, which has been depleted from the muscles and the neural system. Then if you have a shower, contrast baths, mainly because it continues the flushing of the vascular system. And the reason why you do contrast baths, and here's an interesting thing, it's for the veins. The veins do not veins are very, very weak walls. So if you look at a vein, the vein actually has valves. All your veins have valves, basically prevent blood flow from going backwards. So the only way the blood goes from your lower body to your upper body via the veins is through muscle contraction. So by doing contrast baths, contrast showers, you're continuing the ability to bring the blood to the heart, okay? And if you're gonna do micro stretching and you're not gonna do it before you're gonna go to bed, I've always said 2 hours post-activity, mainly because that's when you have fully cooled down, you have a better command of your neural system and your muscles, and you're less likely to overstretch and hurt yourself.
Right, okay.
Okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Any
that's
other questions?
So Nico, that is the key. Micro stretching 2 hours after activity.
Yeah, because you're fully cooled down, Alan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Question
You know-
about, no, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Rich.
Well, question about ice bathing or contrast baths right after, especially intense exercise. doesn't, I mean, is that not the best time to do it if you're going to do it, because it actually shuts down the natural you're cutting off the process of recovery? Shouldn't that even be done later?
Yeah, it should be done later. In fact, that's a good point you're bringing up. And what I should actually say, what I do is when I contrast, rather than having baths, I actually like having contrast showers. But that is a good point, because now we're starting to see that if you actually, so contrast bath is not as bad as actually having an athlete immerse themselves in a tub of ice, because it's affecting the ability to, well, what they're saying is it's actually causing, it may be causing more inflammation in the system. The jury's not out, you know, but what I would like to do and why I use it is because I want to be able to continue the pumping action, which is very, very important to help bring blood back to the heart.
What I've, after, and even before I met you, but after a few years reading your stuff, what I advised, as I say advise with any teenager, because unless I'm there, they, you know, it's up to them to do it. But if we had a hard morning workout, because it's 100 degrees in Houston, we have to run in the morning. They have a hard running workout, ice bath after school or when they get home, or even a cool, you know, a cool pool, moving around gently like that. And then before they go to bed, which is probably 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours after that, micro stretching. It almost, you know, it gives time for each of those. I mean, is that a logical sequence?
That would be perfectly fine, because, you know, the issue then becomes when you've just finished the workout and you've got a more of an increased temperature in the muscle, that could be a shock to the muscle as well when you go straight into an ice bath.
Well, it's got to
This
change
is why
the
I
hormonal
like
response and everything. I mean, it's got to shut down what's happening hormonally, you know, in terms of flow and everything, if you just jump right in ice.
But this is why I tend to use contrast, because my work was I would do 2 minutes of hot, 30 seconds of cold water times 5. But it's a contrast. It's not boom, I'm not immersed totally in water, because again, the idea is I'm wanting to do this pumping action, which is very important.
Well, and I've tried this myself, and I've suggested it to athletes. They're at home. They have no pool. If they do have a pool, it's hot as heck because it's Houston, or they just don't have access to one. They can't fill at home their bathtub up in ice anyway. They can't do the hot, you know, the hot and cold in the shower. I'll tell you, just the other day it happened. I quit turning on the hot water when I take a shower, because after about 30 seconds, the cold water turns warm. But putting cold water only in a bathtub, getting in the bathtub, because not just the cool effect, but the buoyancy. And somebody had said that, I'd read that the buoyancy should help promote better blood flow too, as well. Is that not right?
That I can't answer. Is there anybody here that can? Because obviously you're
where I read that.
You're more buoyant in water.
The theory kind of makes sense. That doesn't mean it actually is, but I think I know I read that somewhere, and I've sort of gone on that.
I've only read you're more buoyant in salt water, which is obviously up here in Scotland, we just don't get anywhere near 100 degrees, Richard. That's just, don't know what to do about that. But if we can get down to the sea and be in the salt water, in the cold sea, there's some great regenerative process in that. But we can't do the contrast. Obviously, we can only do the cold mineral salt water. But you're definitely more buoyant.
Well, I mean, I have in the past, I've actually, one thing I used to do is I used to, if I've really trashed my legs when I was track cycling, is I would actually, before I would go to bed, this is way before I developed microstretching. Microstretching got developed in 1995. Is I would actually use Epsom salt baths, where I would actually immerse myself, and I'm talking a very, very hot tub, where it would be one of those things where you'd you sort of hold on the side of the tub and you go, okay, 10 seconds off, 20 seconds off, until I was able to get in there. By the time I came out of there, my legs were as red as a lobster, but it had the Epsom salt in there. Not, I don't know whether it was a mental thing, but I attributed the fact that the electrolytes, because what happens is one of the other ways of actually sharing chemicals in the body is through osmosis. So could it be that the electrolytes in the Epsom salts were passing into my muscles, and all the waste product was being pulled out because there's a concentration gradient happening? But it felt really good. The next day I was ready.
It's meant to be the magnesium, Nikos.
Pardon me?
It's meant to be the magnesium. So if you can get enough Epsom salts in, because magnesium's a muscle relaxant, and it's supposed to drop your cortisol level slightly. And if you put enough in, you can be buoyant. And then when you're buoyant, then muscles can actually relax because you're not supporting your own weight.
So that combination is really good, yeah.
But you have to put it quite a lot to float. But if you do it Alan's way and you get in the ocean, the compression of the sheer weight of water actually might have an effect like wearing a compression garment at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But there isn't like much empirical data to show whether this is like certainly the case. It's like most anecdotal stuff that people just feel better afterwards.
True. And I mean,
But
the
there's
other thing
something to
too,
say
which
for
is
that.
the other thing,
Oh, I believe in
the
it.
other mineral that's very, very important is zinc. Zinc is one mineral that we actually, the older we get, we lose a lot of it. And in fact, muscle is the highest source of zinc in our bodies. And isn't it kind of interesting that as we get older and we lose muscle mass, we're also losing zinc. And zinc is very, very important for metabolism. You know. Any other questions? Richie?
No, I thought it was pouring outside. I think it's the construction behind us, hearing noise.
I mean, it's almost 5 o'clock. We could end here. We could do the scar tissue presentation last week, or more importantly, send questions our way like Alan's done, questions that Deb's brought forward, questions that Fem's brought forward. Bring questions forward, guys. Bring your athletes as well and other coaches. And let's just make I'd like to sort of have this question and answer period where we all can get involved. And the good thing about it is that after this recording, it goes out to about 25,000 people that Jimson posts on Speed Endurance. So it's about creating the dialogue where we can dispel some myths, maybe bring in some new ideas to basically help, because the last and biggest untapped field in sports is recovery regeneration. And we really don't know a lot about it. We only know Angie Calder's work, which is hydration. We know from nutritional point of view, but we really, really don't have an idea of how we can actually help the muscle recover, regenerate from a physical point of view. I mean, this is why I developed microstretching, but there's other factors involved as well, you know, which is very, very important for us to discuss.
Hey, Jimson, are you
I've
posting
got
the
a-
link?
If I can, for Nikos, the recovery generation, obviously it's going to be harder the older you are. Because I'm still training. I'm still putting the shot and throwing the discus and training like I was, I don't know, a 30-year-old maybe. Is that the case? It's going to be harder the older I am, and I'm 60 now. Is there anything that you do additionally because you're older, as opposed to say a 25-year-old?
Well, you know, that's a question that was asked to me in professional sports. How do you deal with the veteran athlete as opposed to the young athlete? And the question then becomes that with the veteran, you don't do as many technical drills. This is in the soccer pitch, but you basically, you will take the veteran athlete and introduce him more to moderate work, not a lot of high intensity work. And the key is to introduce him more to work that stimulates the recovery of the body. So in answer to your question, just because you're getting older, the things that make the big difference is it's not your ability, it's also the fact that you've lost some muscle mass. Because after the age of 50, we lose, I think, per decade, 10% of our muscle mass. This is why, you know, in our 60s, we have this thing flopping underneath our chin. It's exactly.
That's why I keep going. That's why I keep going.
It's because we lose the muscle mass here. We lose a lot of muscle mass here. So the key is you want to minimize the breakdown of your muscle as much as possible. So to help maintain what you've got. And so, yeah, recovery regeneration becomes a slightly more bigger, how do you say, part of the pie the older we get, because we're dealing with less muscle mass and we're trying to create the scenario where we're able to maintain what we have. Like, I mean, Jimson's a great example. Like he'll be 50 something. I'm not going to tell his real age, but he's still sprinting for 100 meters. Like, I mean, I was a track cyclist. You'll never see me get out on a bike and sprint like the way I used to, but I cycle every day because I want to maintain what I've got. But I have to basically focus on doing things that are going to help me recover, and more importantly, not recover, but regenerate my body.
Yeah, I think the danger is in all athletes, you still your brain still thinks you're 28.
Are you kidding? I'm 22 for crying out loud.
That's my problem. Coaching.
Or maybe 38. Okay, I'll compromise. 38.
I'll tell you guys a funny story, and this is a true story. So about a year and a half ago, I love cycling. It's my passion, but I'm also a maniac. That's why I don't do skiing. So here I am thinking to myself, like I'm 58, and I'm thinking to myself, hey, there's a speed bump up there. I wonder if I can take the speed bump without my hands on the handlebar. You know the answer to that one.
Yeah.
So as soon as I hit the speed bump and I'm falling, the first words that come out of my mouth, and I hope there's not any young kids there, the first words that come out of my mouth was, "What the fuck were you thinking?" It's that mentality again.
Yeah.
We think we're the 22-year-olds that are out there doing it. We've got to take, I mean, and thank goodness we're all still mobile at our ages, but now the factor becomes we have to sort of maintain the muscle mass that we have, because it's the loss of size and girth and thickness that unless you're Sylvester Stallone and you get access to really good human growth hormones. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
About like not doing as much high intensity work, or but as kind of the sprinters, right? You have to do some of the intensity work, or around the 400. So do you just do it maybe 2 days a week, or more quality, or what is your recommendation there?
More quality.
More quality?
More quality. Yeah. I mean, Jimson can answer that question better than I can. Femi can as well, because I'm not a sprinter. Jimson?
I would stick to only 2 hard days a week. So after every hard sprint session, take 2 days off or 2 days of rest or active recovery. And maybe on some other days, like a lactate workout, you can take only 1 day off or active recovery. But I wouldn't aim for more than 2 hard sessions. But that doesn't mean you can, you know, you can still do weights, you can do walking and running and jogging, tempo. Yeah.
I'd add to that that when you're doing those sessions, or at least one of them, if not both of them, depending on what time of year, doing an intense session doesn't mean a lot of volume anyway, and maybe even reduce the volume more. I mean, the typical, you know, volume intensity paradigm, you know, there's really quality is more important than either, especially the older you get. So, you know, the volume isn't really important. The intensity is important, but the quality is vital. So if it means you really reduce the volume to ensure that the intensity is high quality, you're getting more out of what you're doing without overdoing it. And then the other thing too is you can get some lactate work on a bike or an elliptical, something like that, where you take the pounding away too, and you can, you know, you can recover a little better because you're working your system without doing all the beating on the muscles, and especially on the structure and so forth. And that's a good way to kind of moderate things as you get older.
Well, Richie's had has had one hip replacement.
I'm waiting on the other one.
Yeah.
My problem is 36 years of demonstrating with pre-existing injuries and not always warmed up. You know, I sit there and tell my athletes, I'll be warmed up, and then somebody's doing something and I demonstrate bounding for them without having done anything. And I do that. So I've got, you know, extra wear and tear from that. So.
Yep. So this is, as you can see, this is what I wanted to get to when we first started Microstretching Live. I can give a little presentation. I mean, we can give the scar tissue next week, but this is the gist of what I'd like to bring to the fold while we've got almost another 2 months, I think another 8 weeks of this, Richie?
How long you want? We're supposed to be starting around the 20th of August. That may or may not happen. And I may be out of town some Wednesday. I'll let everybody know, but not for a while. Wait, let me look at my calendar and see what I have. Nothing.
No.
Yeah.
So bring questions, ask questions ahead of time. Like Alan did, he wrote me an email at microstretching.com, at microstretching@gmail.com. And yeah, so that way we could sit down and get to it. But as for that athlete, Alan, you know,
Yeah.
have him come on.
Yeah, well, I won't be meeting him until we get the clearance from the pandemic, so I won't be able to video him for next week or anything.
Okay.
We'll see.
Just one with that. Just one with the. I found this with some of my sprinters recently. Is there's a correlation with Achilles pain and guys who are doing negative heel movement and knee extension at the same time. And he can actually, pandemic or not, he can actually send you some like WhatsApp footage of a standing start. Don't tell him what you're looking for. And a lot of those guys, you'll see that the negative heel movement at the same time while they try to extend the knee, they get the Achilles discomfort. And it's actually quite common in sprinters. And the other one I found is with the people who are getting patellar tendonitis type complaints. A lot of times they're not really taking glute and glute med work seriously in their programming. And if you just look at that and adjust that, sometimes the symptoms totally go away, or they at least alleviate to a great extent. So it's just two things I've noticed with sprinters.
Thanks, Tom.
That reminds me of something that about 20 minutes ago, I was thinking of this and then it went to something else. And especially for older athletes, but even the younger ones, I do this with my cross country and track and field athletes when it's appropriate with weather and conditions. But doing as much, oftentimes some warm up completely on good soft grass, barefoot, the gentle parts of warm up, doing warm downs and recovery on grass, barefoot. Part of the problem is, you know, kind of the old, when I was competing 30 something years ago, it was like, well, you can't wear spikes because you'll get Achilles problems and calf problems and shin splints. So you train in big old high-heeled training shoes, and then you put the spikes on and crank, and you get Achilles problem. Well, then it's, well, you do those all the time in practice. So we a lot of times get in the spikes right from the start, some, not all the time. but we also do a lot of warm up and warm down barefoot, which allows for that, you know, angle instead of always being up here. You know, it allows for gentle, not aggressive, but really gently. And some of the kids will do, you know, good faster strides and things even barefoot once they get used to it. But it helps condition the Achilles, gastroc, and everything for soleus for that extra stretch, which is what you want as a sprinter and even a distance runner. That's where you get that zip for your speed.
Yeah,
and
because
not
the issue,
ever doing it, you know.
The issue is that the running shoe has a natural wedge to it. Even if it's a quarter of an inch from the front to the back, it's a natural wedge. So that means that that quarter of an inch on the back of the Achilles tendon is shortened by a quarter of an inch. You know, so it's so even when you're doing these stretches, it's very important that you do them barefoot. And I've often said that if you can, and I don't know right now with all this COVID stuff, is get a lot of your athletes walking barefoot in a sand pit, because the sand depresses and you're able to drop your heel over. When Tom was talking about you seeing a negative thing with the sprinters, and the reason is when you are forward on your toes, automatically your knees have to come forward to basically allow for the center of gravity in your body. I call this the high heel syndrome. If you look at a lot of people that wear high heels, and hey, I used to wear platforms in the 70s, you know, it's just that because the heel is higher up, in order to allow for my center of gravity, my knee has to come slightly forward, which then means my upper body is going back to the position where it needs to be for that center of mass.
Well, historically, and men were wearing high heels for women in France, but historically, the reason for heels for women is it detrains and slims the calf muscles to make them less bulky looking. Unfortunately, that's not what you want to do for an athlete.
I didn't know that.
And the other thing too about the barefoot is the plantar fascia. You know, you've got everything works more and is more conditioned. Because I tell you, if I ever irritate my plantar fascia, the last thing I can do is walk barefoot for a little while.
That's Soleus stretch, the one that I showed you with something underneath the ball. That works wonders for the plantar fascia. I do that every night. Anyhow, it's 5:15. Thanks for putting up with another tragedy with the computer thing, but we finally figured it out with my microphone, of course. You know.
Thank you very much.
It's
Thank you. Tremendous. Thank you.
You need a film crew, Nikos.
Pardon me?
The scar tissue.
You need a film
PowerPoint
crew,
download.
Nikos. We need to organize a film crew for you.
Hey, listen, I mean, like I said, I'm actually going online to offer my first online course on microstretching, the theory and foundation. So I better have this thing figured out before then. But I definitely have to, once all this COVID stuff is done, I've got a team that we're going to do we have to do a lot of videotaping, you know. But it would be great because I'd like to put a whole file together of all this stuff.
Yeah, good.
But next week, like I said, please invite people. Jimson, advertise for it on Speed Endurance. Richie, you do on Facebook. Deb, thanks for coming. Hopefully we'll see you next week. Bring some other athletes, you know, and let's just all get together and just have like a live chat like we're doing now.
Yeah, tremendous. Thank you.
Thanks, Nico.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Next week.
Take care. See you next week.
All right.
Cheers,
Bye.
guys.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye,
Bye.
Malcolm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.